and welcome to my channel In Search of Wonder. My name is Anne, and today I just want to have a little coffee table chat with you. So my mom is from the Upper Peninsula area of Michigan, which was settled in the late 1800s and early 1900s by a large number of Finns from Finland. And so my mom is 100% Finn, although she was born in Michigan. And one time when I went up to visit my mom in Michigan, I found this in a thrift store up there, the Finnish cookbook. 400 old country recipes, including delicious baked goods, pasties, vegetable pancakes, fish, sausages, and a sensational coffee table. And I was reading this cookbook, and the author was an American who I believe may have had some Finnish roots, but she spent some time in Finland, and she learned all about Finnish cuisine and everything. And so this book is all the recipes that she learned and all of the things that she learned about culturally about food in Finland, etc. And one of the things she spoke at length about was the coffee table. Now this was in like the 60s and 70s, and it was still a tradition then. I don't know about now, but apparently it's a tradition in Finland to have a coffee table. And I love this idea that basically a housewife is prepared at all times with a variety of baked goods. According to this book, the official number is 7. 7 different types of baked goods that are not quite desserts. They're just like kind of like tea accompaniments. And so they would offer those with coffee for their guests whenever someone stopped by to visit them. And they would always use their best dishes and share this food. There was a whole like sequence of, for the first cup of coffee, the type of baked good that you had to go with it, and then for the second cup and third cup and the fourth cup, because Finns drink a lot of coffee. I don't know if you know this, but they drink more coffee per capita than any other country in the world, which is why I'm sure that I like coffee. I blame it on my genes. My friends say that I am a chain drinker, coffee drinker that is, rather than a chain smoker, because I go from one coffee cup to the next and no lies detected. I blame it on my Finnish roots. Anyway, I've always, ever since I read this book, I have always loved the idea of a coffee table and of just having something to share with friends when they stop by. I do enjoy having friends over for coffee and tea and a little dessert. I've never done like a formal official Finnish coffee table, and I don't think I ever will, but the concept in general I love. I think that Germany also has a traditional concept similar to that called the coffee klatsch, something like that. Anyway, so I love that idea, and I want to incorporate that on my channel here. And so periodically to have these coffee table chats with you. And the idea is that over some coffee and a treat, we can just discuss something bookish related. I will have a question in mind that I will discuss and share my answers with, but then invite you to share your thoughts on the topic in the comments so that we can have this kind of virtual conversation and discussion going on. I would also love to do it live occasionally to add to the whole conversational aspect of it and community. So that's my thought, but I'm gonna start off with this one. And I have my fine china. This was from my wedding. It was a wedding gift. Nowadays, people don't register for fine china anymore, or at least I think it's pretty rare. And back when I got married, it was starting to decline in popularity. Like a lot of people weren't doing that, brides weren't doing that. But I did because I just love the whole idea of having something fancy that you can pull out for special occasions and special guests. And I determined that I would use it. It wouldn't just languish in a cupboard to look at. It would be something that I would enjoy and use. So on holidays and when we have guests, we definitely pull out the fine china, particularly the teacups. And so I have my coffee in my teacup today. And I even made a recipe from this book. I'm gonna tell you the Finnish name of it because these Finnish words crack me up. So in English, it's called an apple sugar cake. And I'm sure I'm butchering this pronunciation because I don't speak Finnish. Phonetically, it looks like omena sakurakaku. So, Finnish apple sugar cake. I don't know if you can see. What's really fun is you make the dough, which it doesn't have a lot of eggs in it, but it has the consistency of like a angel food cake. I don't know how that happened because there's like 2 eggs in it. So I don't know, but it has kind of like the consistency of angel food cake, maybe a little bit more dense and just lightly sweet. And then you slice the apples and you put them vertically into the surface of the batter, and the batter's thick enough that it holds them in place. So it's kind of hard to tell, but like the apples are upright. And then you dust the whole thing with cinnamon sugar. I added a little nutmeg too. Anyway, that is my apple sugar cake that I am enjoying with this chat. I thought apples were appropriate because today is the first day of September as I'm filming this. I had a bunch of apples that I needed to get rid of because they were starting to go bad. So I wanted to cook up some things. So I made some apple crisp, and then I made this apple cake. I don't actually like cooked apples, but the cake part is good. But everyone else in my family enjoys any sort of baked apple recipe. Anyway, so today let's talk about characters, specifically bad characters. And by bad, I don't mean badly drawn characters or poorly written characters, because that's a separate issue for another day. But I mean characters who do morally wrong things, or are unethical, or are maybe just stupid and foolish and continue to make poor choices throughout the story. How do you feel about those bad characters? And I will share my thoughts, but I also want to know what you're thinking in the comments below. How do you feel if there is a bad character in a book? Now, obviously, most books have some kind of antagonist who may not be evil, but they definitely are working against the protagonist in the story. And so they often do things that are wrong to them, or they provide a conflict that the hero or the protagonist of the story has to get over. So I'm not necessarily talking about that, although some people, depending on the villain in the story and the things that they do, that is enough for them to DNF a book if the villain is just too terrible and does too terrible of things. I guess if a book is really graphic or gory, that would be enough for me to DNF. And also, I don't read a lot of like thriller or horror stories, so I don't have a lot of experience with that. I'm sure there is a point where I would be like, okay, I can't handle any more of this. I don't want to read any more of this kind of stuff if it's too, too evil and it's too detailed in the description. But then it's the dwelling on the evil sort of thing that bothers me, and not necessarily the fact that there is an evil character in the book. Because let's face it, There is real evil in the world, and there are real evil people. I don't think we necessarily need to be dwelling on it, but I also don't think it's an automatic element that needs to be excluded from a book. I think it can be dealt with in a positive way. But I'm not necessarily talking about villains. I'm talking about if the main character or a side character is a bad person in whatever way. Maybe they're just selfish, just your ordinary, everyday selfish. Maybe they are just rude and sarcastic to everybody, not necessarily a terrible and evil person. How do you feel about main characters and or side characters being like this in a book? How does it make you feel about the book? And what is the point where you would DNF a book due to this? Is there a point where you would DNF a book because you don't like what the characters are doing? And if so, why? Where are those lines that you draw? What is it that characters really do that make you want to finish a book, or make you want to not finish a book or read any further in it? That's what I really want to know. I'm curious about it. And for myself, I can tolerate a high level of terrible behavior in a main character, assuming it's not utterly reprehensible and evil, with some given conditions and caveats. If the author is making a point with the character's bad behavior, and that point is a good point, like it is true, then I can read the story. I can appreciate it. I may not enjoy it at a high level, but I can appreciate it and admire what the author is saying through the story, even if I don't actually like the characters. For example, The Great Gatsby has terrible characters. The main characters, they're all just terrible people. But the author is making a point. He's not justifying them. He's not highlighting or glorifying what they're doing. In fact, as the reader, you sense the grossness of it, and you feel like they all get what they deserve in the end, honestly, to one extent or another. I think that F. Scott Fitzgerald was saying some valuable things about not just the American dream, but the forsaking of morality and goodness in the pursuit of the American dream. And I think that's why he chose a humble, down-to-earth, decent Midwestern guy as the narrator of the story, to kind of highlight the difference between his character and the rich and wealthy, fast-living sort of characters that populate the rest of the story. So I think that F. Scott Fitzgerald was saying some important and true things. And so even though he's portraying these characters as living very selfish lives, focusing on all of the wrong things and making terrible choices, hurting people in the process carelessly, I think that's obvious to the reader. And we're not meant to look at them and say, oh, wow, that's amazing, I want to be like that. No, you're meant to look at it and say, I don't want that. That's not good. I don't like it. So I can handle that. That doesn't bother me at all. And it doesn't turn me off of a book. It doesn't make me want to stop reading it. And it doesn't make me think that's a terrible book. In fact, I think good things are being said in the book. And so that makes it good in that sense. Maybe not enjoyable, but good as a book. And so that's one thing. If the author is making a point with the character's terrible behavior, even if they never learn from it and never grow from it, it's obvious the author is making a point. But then there is the character that has a development arc and a redemption arc. And that would be my favorite, when you can see that the character is a terrible person at the beginning of the story, but as the story goes on, they learn and they change and they grow, and those edges get rubbed off of them. I think of Emma by Jane Austen as an example. A lot of people don't like Emma, understandably, because at the beginning of the story, she's endearing enough that you have sympathy for her as a character and you can get to like her in spite of her flaws and her foibles, but she's definitely very flawed. But Jane Austen is not trying to glorify her flaws. In fact, she's pointing them out and saying, this is an error in her makeup, in her character. This is why she became this way. And then as the story develops, this is how Emma is going to change and grow to overcome these flaws, or to correct these flaws in her character and to become a better person. And what I love about Emma is that her character flaws are so normal and they're so down to earth, and they're something that, if we're honest, all of us would struggle with on one level or another. They're just very basic human qualities that are not always good. And Emma shows them in a very unflattering light. And sometimes that mirror is a little bit uncomfortable to look at, but I think it's masterfully done, which is one reason why I love Emma. Because Austen shines a light on a character who isn't an evil person at heart, just your everyday, run-of-the-mill, self-absorbed, self-unaware person who has all these great ideas of how to manage everyone else in her life, but has zero concept of her own character flaws that she needs to change. And it's a painful process for her to come face to face with her failings and her mistakes and her sins. It's a painful process for her to admit them, to acknowledge them, and it involves humbling, which I think is also what makes Emma such a masterpiece, because not all authors seem to understand the humbling that is necessary as part of this process. That's also what changed Mr. Darcy, was the humbling that he received at the hands of Lizzie. That humbling himself is what led to his change, which I think is a key piece that is necessary in any genuine character redemption arc. So anyway, I really love the change of Emma and Mr. Darcy and other characters like that, when they start out as not a great person, but then the change happens throughout the course of the book, and by the end of the book, they have learned a lot about themselves. Maybe they're not perfect. I don't think Emma is necessarily perfect by the end of the book, but she has learned from her mistakes, she has grown, and she has come face to face, the most important part, with her flaws, and she's acknowledged them and admitted them and is willing to change, which is the important part, right? So I don't mind. The tricky part is, when you're reading a book and it starts out, you never know how long this character development process is going to take, or how long like the redemption arc is going to be. Sometimes it takes until the very end of the book to get to that point where you actually start to like the character. And so I guess the question is, how long do you want to put up with that? For me, I can put up with a great deal. I don't, if I can see that the author is working something out here, I will hang in there. All other considerations being in place, such as, you know, good writing, compelling story, etc. If it's not an interesting enough story, or the writing isn't compelling enough, then I'll give up on it. But not just because the character is a terrible person and I hate the character. It takes a lot for me to DNF a book because I hate the actual character. Mostly because I feel like a book that is well written, that is accurately reflecting true human nature and actual human characters, is merely representing daily life and the people that I encounter. And in a book, I suppose it is perfectly permissible to cast aside characters and books because they're fictional and it doesn't hurt anybody if you're like, okay, that's an annoying person, slam the book, done. But I also feel like it's sort of like training ground for real life. So I feel like if I can learn to have a little compassion or empathy or understanding at the very least for characters in these books who have flaws of one kind or another, then perhaps that will help me in real life as I encounter similar sorts of people in my daily walk, in my daily journey. So sometimes I hang in there just for that reason alone, just for the training it provides in learning to get along with prickly characters that you don't necessarily love. And goodness knows we all need that sort of training, right? The one kind of character that I cannot handle and that will make me DNF a book or regret not DNFing when I get to the end, and that is a character who is bad or stupid, even more so. That's the part that I just can't handle that. If a character is continually making wrong choices, but the author is not presenting it as a bad thing, they're just saying, this is the story, and nothing happens, no consequences in particular, that's terrible. Like, I hate it when that happens. it's not obvious to the reader that the person is making terrible choices. Like, two different readers might read the same book, and one person might think to themselves, oh my goodness, this character is doing terrible things, what they're saying to that. Because sometimes I've read books and I've not been offended by the things that the character said. Then I go read other reviews and other people are like, oh my goodness, they were so rude to everybody all the time, they were so sarcastic or whatever. I was like, I didn't really see that when I was reading it. It didn't hit me because the author wasn't presenting it as such. They were presenting everything, you know, in a positive way for whatever reason. And so sometimes, you know, a reader might not catch that actually this character is a terrible person. But then other readers will, and will be like, what's that? But what always gets me is when a character is stupid. One book that I really disliked and ended up, well, I don't know if I DNF'd. I think I read it the whole way through, but I didn't love it. And a lot of people love it. So this was just me, my personal reaction to it. The main character, it was called something or other list, somebody's list. It was like a Regency rom-com. So it wasn't, you know, high literature or anything. But the main character was just doing these continually stupid stuff. And some of it was like anachronistic in that someone in her position and situation in that time in history, I found it highly unbelievable that they would actually do these things. And all of it was just for comedic effect, I think. Like, it was just supposed to be funny. But to me, it was just irritating. It wasn't funny. I was like, why is she being so dumb and doing this dumb stuff? And it wasn't funny to me. It was just stupid. And so I didn't like that. So I don't like it when characters just continually do stupid stuff. Even if as a reader, you're supposed to recognize it as being stupid, but it's supposed to be funny. And it's never like the character never realizes that she's being stupid. She just keeps being stupid. And you're just supposed to laugh at it as the reader or whatever. I don't know whatever the reader is supposed to get out of it. That isn't funny to me or enjoyable. I don't like it when the character just never learns from anything and just keeps stupidly doing stupid stuff. Another book that I read recently that I've been talking about in my weekly reading vlogs, in that book, Laura's Shadow, the main character, the historic character, she was a self-absorbed, unkind person who didn't. Okay, so there were people in her life where I can acknowledge that the way, like in particular, like her sister-in-law, sometimes the way her sister-in-law interacted with her was unacceptable, and her sister-in-law was in the wrong, 100%. But not every time and in every way. Not all of the interactions were like that. But the main character herself, Mariah, she was consistently rude and unkind and didn't give any way to the sister-in-law. Like, never allowed for her to be anything but a terrible person. In her mind, she was just always out to get her. And I think that as the reader, I was supposed to agree with her. And that's what I can't get behind, because in my opinion, the sister-in-law, you know, was not an angel or a nice, kind, sweet, loving person, but she also wasn't a terrible person. And she was the kind of person that you can learn to get along with and you can learn to work with, even if they're not perfect. And yet our main character, Mariah, she was an extremely prickly person herself who would be very difficult to get along with. And yet she expected everybody to be able to bend over backwards for her and do whatever she wanted, like give her what she wanted. And then she had a bit of a martyr complex as well. And so she would, like, her brother got married and brought the sister to her house. And so she just, of her own accord, nobody asked her to do this. She just moved out of the upstairs of the house into a smaller room, but all the time having this martyr attitude about it. But nobody asked her to do that. She just did it of her own accord. So she just wasn't a likable person. And then she just made terrible personal choices for herself that were driven by unhealthy emotions and feelings. And she never really acknowledged, at the very least, the unhealthiness of her feelings and her choices that she made. Possible spoiler here, so if you want to read the book, maybe skip. She was very much in love with this guy, but he was a player kind of guy. And he told her repeatedly he had no interest in marrying anyone. and he just wanted to, you know, have fun with life, right? That kind of guy. But she's madly in love with him. She barely knows him. She has like a relationship with him, like an acquaintanceship, like from afar, kind of through mutual friends or whatever. Doesn't know him very well on a personal level. Knows that he is a bit of a player, but somehow is, I don't know, thinks that she can win him, or she can just take what she can get from him and she'll be happy with that. I don't know. And then there's like a really awkward scene where she basically acts on the fact that he is a player and entices him in her own brusque way. And then she ends up being pregnant with his child. And then before he can ever even find out, he dies tragically. But she never acknowledges any wrongdoing or wrong thinking in that journey to the point where she got. And there was another man who, like a good kind of man, who loved her and wanted to marry her before she ever had this whole interaction with this other guy. And she just flat out refused him. And it was for very shallow reasons, because, you know, she didn't really like the way he looked or whatever. And she, even though he was kind to her, they had developed a sort of tenuous friendship over weekly meals. And there were things about his company that she enjoyed, and there was some common ground for them. Like, she was just flat out was like, no, I'm not ever going to be, like, she closed her heart against him purposely. That was the thing. It wasn't just like, you know, she searched her heart and was like, you know, there's just nothing there. I can't build a relationship on that. No, she purposely closed the door on that relationship and like walled up her heart against him. And then she ended up marrying him in desperation because she was going to have a baby. And so he was kind, and he, you know, he knew the whole situation, and he was perfectly willing to marry her and give the child his name, etc. And what happens after that is very much glossed over, and all we get is a comment at the end of the book that he loved her, but by the time she fell in love with him, he didn't love her anymore, basically, because I'm assuming she had treated him like dirt the whole time, because she never appreciated the sacrifices that he made for her and the love that he had for her and his kindness. So she just wasn't a good person, but she wasn't being portrayed as a not good person. We were supposed to, as the reader, you were supposed to get on board with her feelings and her choices, and you were supposed to feel them along with her and, you know, approve of her choices along the way, even when they were terrible ones. So that is where I do not enjoy reading a bad character, when it's being presented as, if not good, at least reasonable, and something that you can empathize with as a reader, rather than being something that is terrible. And some people, you know, comment about the story saying, oh, well, it's very realistic. Okay, yes, people making bad choices is totally realistic, and doing stupid things. And it may not be realistic that they always learn from it or grow or change, but I don't want to read a book about people who are just terrible and never wanting to change. I don't want to read a book where terrible behavior is just described and there's no redemption, there's no hope that happens, there's no change, there's no transformation. It just, at the end, you're just left with nothing. There was like no point. There's no point. And that was my, you know, aside from the terrible characters of the story, like the plot was nothing, because nothing happened. She made a series of bad choices, and the end. That's it. So those are my thoughts. Thank you for joining me in the conversation today. And please let me know in the comments, how do you feel about morally bad or unethical or unlikable characters? What would make you DNF a book with an unlikable character? What are some situations that can make you tolerate an unlikable character? And what are some examples of books that you've read of characters who are unlikable or terrible in one way or the other? And how did you feel about them? Did you keep reading the book? Did you like the book? Etc. Let's keep the conversation going in the comments, and I look forward to chatting with you next time. Bye.